In the early and mid-1400s, it was generally rather rare for individuals in Italy to fund ambitious building programs. Obviously, that was partly due to the massive costs that were associated with a new structure, a fact that helps to explain why the buildings that were erected were often paid for by city governments or guilds. But there were also ethical concerns, as there was a general distaste for ostentation, and personal monuments were seen as an irresponsible use of one's wealth. And yet, in the years between 1436 and 1450, Cosimo de' Medici, based in Florence, spent very large sums of money on several building projects, and defended his campaign in an innovative way by citing ancient texts in arguing that it was in fact natural and proper for nobles to patronize architecture. But let's back up for a moment and think about the bigger picture. In the 1300s, as A.D. Fraser Jenkins showed in a 1970 article, humanists generally felt that poverty should be praised. By the early 1400s, attitudes had shifted somewhat, and riches were seen as morally permissible, but, as Leonardo Bruni wrote, spending money on one's own tomb was simply ridiculous, as it was much better to be known by one's works or deeds. Giving money to charity, say, was preferable to using it to fund a new palazzo, and could offset in the process the sins that were often associated with charging interest. Even that piety, though, soon thawed, and in the 1430s Leon Battista Alberti wrote that spending money on buildings, as his family had in fact done, could be expensive and was hardly necessary, but could also be harmless and pleasurable. Interestingly, it was in that same decade that Cosimo began to underwrite some seriously ambitious building projects. The first of these, it seems, was the monastery of San Marco in Florence. That was followed by a series of other church additions and private villas, and, notably, his family's home, the Palazzo Medici. In some circles, Cosimo soon then began to acquire a reputation for generosity, and in fact several Venetians reached out to him to ask him for support with local projects of their own. At the same time, other Italians felt that Cosimo was guilty of appearing too powerful, or they were envious of him. In response to these charges, though, some of Cosimo's associates began to employ creative arguments in justifying his patronage. In around 1455, for instance, Timoteo Maffei, an Augustinian monk who lived in a house that was restored by Cosimo, wrote a defense of the patron. In it, he cited the medieval theologian Thomas Aquinas, who had argued in the 1200s that magnificence can be a virtue. By extension, since Cosimo de' Medici's architectural patronage had yielded magnificent works, surely he was virtuous as well. Indeed, wrote Maffei, Cosimo hadn't acted out of personal interest, but simply, quote, wanted what was consistent with a great city as Florence, unquote. But Aquinas' ideas, in fact, were based in turn on a passage in a book by Aristotle, who had discussed in some detail what sort of person can be magnificent. It was only, argued the Greek philosopher, the rich who could be, as they were the only ones who could spend on a scale appropriate to a great city or setting. And now Alberti, who had previously seen spending on building as a sort of harmless frivolity, began to argue that ambitious patronage was in fact a critically important service to the patron's family, descendants, and city. Great men, in other words, should undertake building projects proportional to their status. This sort of argument, rooted in the writings of Aristotle, placed architectural patronage on a firm footing, and the years after 1450 saw an explosion of considerable building projects. In addition to Cosimo, Lodovico Gonzaga in Mantova, Pope Pius II in Rome and his native Pienza, and Alfonso V in Naples all began to fund collections of buildings. And importantly, these men were often seen as the effective authors of the resulting structures. They were often more visible than the architects themselves. Now, admittedly, there were still some lines that could not be crossed, and at one point Cosimo is said to have told his architect, Michelozzo, to revise his original plans for the Palazzo Medici so that they were more modest and would not spark public resentment. In general, though, architectural patronage on an ambitious scale was now seen as generally permissible, or even as a duty of magnificent men upon whom the greater glory of their city supposedly depended.